The war had been raging for weeks, each side pushing and pulling with everything they had. On one side were the humans, fighting to protect their planet. On the other side were the alien forces, creatures from a distant galaxy, known for their strength, technology, and their ruthlessness. The battlefields were filled with smoke, fire, and the sound of weapons firing. It seemed like neither side could gain the upper hand, but everything changed in an instant. In the middle of the battlefield, an alien warrior named Zorax had been one of the fiercest fighters. His race was known for their unmatched combat abilities, and Zorax was considered one of the strongest among them. He had been a warrior for years, leading his troops with unmatched skill and determination. However, on this day, everything went wrong. The battle had been intense, with explosions shaking the ground beneath their feet. Zorax fought bravely, taking down enemies left and right, but as he was about to strike the final blow to a human soldier, he was caught off guard. A human sniper, hidden in the distance, fired a powerful shot that struck Zorax in the spine. The shot was precise, hitting him right in the lower back, paralyzing him instantly. Zorax's body collapsed to the ground. His muscles, which had been so strong and powerful moments before, were now useless. He could feel the coldness spread through his body as he lay helpless on the ground. His vision blurred, and the once mighty warrior could only hear the distant sounds of the battle continuing without him. He tried to move, but his body refused. To obey, the pain was intense, but it was nothing compared to the feeling of helplessness. As the battle raged on around him, Zorax lay there, vulnerable and completely alone. His fellow soldiers who had once fought beside him had already moved on. They were not concerned with the fate of one fallen warrior, especially one who could no longer fight. In the chaos of war, there was no time for mercy or second chances. One by one, Zorax watched as his comrades passed by, ignoring his plea for help. They were focused on their mission, on the need to win at any cost. The cold reality of war set in for Zorax as he realized that no one was going to help him. He'd been left behind, discarded like an old weapon, no longer useful to the cause. But there was one person who noticed. Jack, a young human soldier, had seen the alien warrior fall. He'd been part of the same team that had been fighting the alien forces, and like everyone else, he had been trained to view the aliens as the enemy. But something about the sight of Zorax lying there, helpless and broken, stirred something inside of him. The alien warrior had been the one who had killed so many of his comrades, and yet Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of pity for him. The rest of the soldiers ignored Zorax, focused only on the enemy that was still fighting back. They were in a rush, wanting to finish the battle as quickly as possible. But Jack couldn't move forward. He was frozen, his heart heavy with the realization that, no matter what Zorax had done, he was still a living being, and no one deserved to be left behind like this. Jack hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. He had been trained to fight, to follow orders, and to show no mercy to the enemy. But here was a chance to do something different, a chance to show mercy, to do something that went against everything he had been taught. Jack looked around at his fellow soldiers who were too busy with their tasks to notice him. No one was paying attention. Zorax's eyes, though weak and clouded with pain, still looked at him. The alien warrior's expression was one of desperation, a silent plea for help. Jack swallowed hard. He couldn't just leave him there. Couldn't walk away knowing that he could have done something to help. Without another thought, Jack knelt beside Zorax, his hands trembling slightly. He had no idea how to help the alien, but he knew he couldn't just leave him to die alone on the battlefield. Jack carefully checked Zorax's injuries, trying to assess how bad they were. It was clear that the alien warrior's condition was critical. But there was no time to waste. The battle was still raging, and Jack's fellow soldiers were moving further away, oblivious to what he was doing. Jack knew that if he stayed with Zorax, he would be putting his own life in danger, could be branded a traitor, a coward for helping the enemy. But Jack made up his mind. He wasn't going to leave Zorax to die alone. He would do whatever it took to save him. The alien warrior's gaze softened as Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything in that moment. Jack had made a choice. He had chosen to be different from everyone else. He wasn't going to follow orders this time. He was going to do what he felt was right. As the war continued to rage around them, Jack made a decision that no one else would understand. He was going to save Zorax, no matter what the cost. But little did Jack know, this decision would change not only his life, but the future of both humans and aliens alike. The battle was far from over, and Jack's actions would have consequences that no one could predict. Zorax, the once feared alien warrior, had just found a savior in the most unlikely of places, a young human soldier who was willing to take a stand. The future of the war was now in the hands of someone who had been written off by everyone else. And this was just the beginning. The chaos of the battlefield raged around them, but in the midst of it all, one human soldier made an unexpected decision. Jack, the young soldier who had seen everything, destruction and the brutality of war, was faced with something he had never anticipated, a moment of mercy. The alien warrior, Zorax, lay helpless on the ground, paralyzed from the waist down. His body was covered in blood, and his once gleaming armor was battered beyond recognition. To any other soldier, the sight of him would have been just another fallen enemy. A warrior who had fought hard, but whose life was now expendable. Yet Jack couldn't look away. As the battle continued to unfold, his mind kept drifting back to the alien, whose eyes, still filled with pain, locked onto his. There was something in that gaze that made Jack question everything he had been taught. The aliens were supposed to be the enemy, the invaders who had come to take everything from humanity. But Zorax was more than just a soldier. He was a living being, just like Jack. And he had a story of his own. Jack's heart raced, not just from the adrenaline of battle, but from the weight of the choice before him. Could turn away, continue to follow orders, and leave Zorax to die on the battlefield. But something inside of him, something deep and unexplainable, pushed him toward the fallen. Warrior Zorax's chest heaved with every labored breath, his eyes filled with a silent plea. "Help me," the alien seemed to whisper, though no words escaped his lips. Jack's own breathing became shallow as he looked around at his comrades, who were too busy fighting to notice the moment unfolding before them. Time seemed to slow as Jack kneeled beside Zorax. His hands trembled with uncertainty. As he touched the alien's shoulder, it wasn't just pity he felt. It was something more. Was it compassion? A sense of responsibility. Whatever it was, Jack knew he couldn't leave Zorax to die alone. The sound of explosions and gunfire faded into the background as Jack made a decision. "I'm not leaving you here," he muttered under his breath. But even as the words left his lips, Jack understood that his actions would have consequences. If his comrades discovered he was aiding an enemy soldier, his career, perhaps even his life, would be in jeopardy. And yet he couldn't let that stop him. His hands moved quickly and decisively, carefully assessing the damage to Zorax's body. He knew it would take all his strength to move the alien warrior, but Jack wasn't about to let him die on the battlefield. He had to act fast, before anyone noticed he was disobeying orders. Zorax, still weak, looked up at Jack with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. The alien's expression softened, and for a moment, Jack thought he saw a flicker of something beyond the cold. Calculated warrior, something human. With a great effort, Jack lifted Zorax into his arms, dragging him toward cover behind a destroyed vehicle. His muscles burned from the effort, but Jack refused to stop. As he moved, he could hear the sounds of battle growing louder again, but the weight of the alien's body in his arms made it seem like everything else had faded away. For those few moments, it was just him and Zorax, two beings from opposite sides of a war, connected by an unspoken bond. When they finally reached the makeshift shelter, Jack placed Zorax on the ground gently, his breathing heavy but steady. He glanced around quickly to ensure no one had seen him. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was no turning back now. The alien was safe for the moment. The silence between them was deafening. Jack wasn't sure if Zorax could understand him, but he spoke anyway. "I don't know why I'm doing this. You're my enemy, and you've killed so many of my friends. But right now, you need help, and I'm not going to leave you here." Zorax's eyes fluttered, and for the first time since Jack had found him, the alien tried to speak. His voice was weak, barely a whisper. "You saved me." Jack nodded, Yeah, I did. But don't get any ideas. I'm not your friend. I'm just not going to let you die out here. There was a brief pause, and then, to Jack's surprise, Zorax's lips curled into a faint smile. It was a strange sight, this warrior, once so fierce and terrifying, now showing a sign of something Jack had never expected. Gratitude. Vulnerability. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching footsteps. Jack's heart leaped. Into his throat, his unit was coming closer. They would find him. They would know what he had done. Zorax, still too weak to move, looked at Jack with urgency in his eyes. You must leave. Jack hesitated for only a second. The fear of being caught was overwhelming, but he knew one thing for sure. Leaving Zorax now would be as wrong as abandoning a wounded animal. With no time to waste, Jack grabbed the alien's arm and hoisted him up once more. Stay quiet, Jack whispered. We're getting out of here. As Jack dragged the alien through the ruins of the battlefield, he knew he was risking everything. His comrades would soon realize he was gone. His superiors would hunt him down, and the punishment would be severe. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the alien warrior in his arms, and the bond they had unexpectedly formed in the heat of war. The night was falling, and the battlefield that had once been ablaze with violence was now eerily quiet. The sounds of war had slowly died down, replaced by the heavy thuds of Jack's boots as he moved through the wreckage. The stars above seemed far too peaceful, too distant, for the chaos that had unfolded just hours before. His heart still raced, but not from the fight anymore. It was the weight of his actions that now pressed on him, heavier than any armor could ever be. With every step, Jack could feel Zorax's breath growing more labored against his back. He had managed to drag the alien to a safe location, a small abandoned shack near the edge of the battlefield. The structure was barely standing, but it would provide enough cover to hide for the night. The alien, once a proud warrior on the battlefield, now clung to Jack as if he were the only lifeline left. Zorax's condition had worsened during their escape. His movements were sluggish, his once mighty body failing him with every passing moment. The paralysis had left him vulnerable. Weak, something Jack had never imagined the alien to be. And yet, despite the warrior's suffering, there was a sense of gratitude in his eyes. Jack had done the unthinkable, saved his enemy. But Jack wasn't sure if he had made the right choice. The weight of his decision settled in his chest like a stone. His thoughts raced. What if he was wrong? What if helping the alien put them both in danger? His actions would not go unnoticed forever. He would be branded a traitor, labeled a coward. There was no way to hide it. Soon enough, his comrades would realize he had disappeared, and they would come searching for him. And if they found him, if they found out what he had done, it wouldn't just be his career on the line, it would be his life. Jack laid Zorax down on a pile of old rotting wood in the corner of the shack, pulled a dusty, torn blanket over the alien's body, doing his best to keep him comfortable. But Jack knew that comfort was a fleeting thing. He wasn't sure how much longer Zorax had. The wound in his spine had bled for hours, and there was only so much Jack could do with the limited medical supplies he had with him. He had no training to tend to alien wounds. But somehow, he had to keep him alive long enough to figure out a plan. As he sat on the cold floor beside Zorax, the silence between them grew heavier. The alien's eyes flickered open, his gaze still full of confusion, pain, and surprisingly something softer, trust. Jack, the very person who had been trained to kill his kind, was now the one to save him. And yet Jack didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a fool. You saved me, Zorax whispered, his voice faint but clear. His words were slow, each one a struggle, as if speaking drained him. But there was no mistaking the sincerity in his tone. Jack glanced down, meeting the alien's gaze. Yeah, Jack said quietly. I did. But that doesn't mean I'm going to help you win this war. You're still my enemy. Zorax's eyes seemed to narrow in understanding. His voice grew softer. You didn't believe in the cause anymore? Clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. It's not about belief, he said, his voice shaking with the weight of his own doubts. It's about doing what's right. No, I'm not thinking about your cause or my side. I'm just trying to get you out of here alive. Zorax seemed to study him for a long moment, as if trying to understand the human soldier before him. Then, without warning, he spoke again. You were different, he said quietly. Most of your kind would have killed me. Jack stiffened. I'm not most people. A brief silence passed between them before Zorax spoke again, his voice barely above. A whisper. Why? The question hit Jack like a punch to the gut. Why? Why had he saved the alien? Was it because of some misplaced sense of honor? Was it the right thing to do? He couldn't really explain it. All he knew was that, in that moment, he couldn't just walk away. It'd seen too much death, too much suffering on both sides. But he had never witnessed anything like this before. Enemy, broken and vulnerable, needing help. Jack shook his head, looking away. I don't know, he muttered. I just couldn't leave you there. There was a long pause. Then Zorax reached up weakly, placing a hand on Jack's arm. It was a strange gesture, a warrior, one so fierce and proud, now relying on the very soldier who was supposed to be his enemy. I owe you my life, Zorax said simply. Jack didn't respond. What was there to say? He hadn't done it for gratitude or recognition. He hadn't even done it to make himself feel better. He had done it because in the end he couldn't stand by and let any one enemy or not suffer without a chance at survival. Jack was still trying to understand what that made him, but that was the problem. Jack had stepped into unknown territory. It crossed a line that couldn't be undone. From this moment on, his fate was intertwined with Zorax's, and there was no turning back. He had already made a decision that no one else would understand, as Jack sat there. Watching the alien warrior sleep fitfully, the weight of his choice bore down on him even more. What had he started? What would his actions lead to? He didn't know. All he could do now was wait and hope that, somehow, he had done the right thing. But the future was uncertain. And Jack knew that what came next would be the hardest part yet, and deep in his heart, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war he was part of was no longer just a fight between two sides. It was something much larger, something he couldn't yet comprehend. What had started as a simple act of mercy was now something much more dangerous, a risk that could change everything. The rain started falling just before sunrise. It wasn't heavy at first, just a soft, steady drizzle, tapping against the metal roof of the broken shack where Jack and Zorax were hiding. But as the clouds thickened and the wind howled low like a warning, Jack realized this storm wasn't just in the sky. A different kind of storm was coming. One that would test everything he believed in. Zorax was still unconscious, his breathing shallow. Jack had done his best to treat the alien's wounds, wrapping them in strips of cloth from his own uniform, using whatever supplies he had scavenged from fallen medics. But Zorax needed more than bandages. He needed real help, medical tools. Jack didn't have. And more time. Something they might not have. Jack stood at the door of the shack, staring into the gray morning mist. Somewhere beyond those trees, beyond the silence, were his fellow soldiers. They would be looking for him soon. He hadn't returned to base, hadn't checked in. And when they found him manned, they would find an injured enemy at his side. He could already hear the accusations. Traitor, coward, enemy sympathizer. But deep down, Jack didn't regret it. Not yet. Behind him, Zorax stirred. Jack turned quickly, kneeling beside the warrior. The alien's eyes fluttered open, dazed but more aware than the night before. His voice came rough and broken. Why, did you stay? Jack hesitated. Wasn't a question with a simple answer. 'Cause you were going to die, he said softly. And I couldn't walk away from that. Zorax blinked slowly, his expression unreadable. You disobeyed your leaders. Risked your life. For me, Jack nodded. I guess that makes me an idiot. No, Zorax whispered. It makes you human. The words hit Jack harder than expected. There was no sarcasm in Zorax's tone, no bitterness, just quiet honesty. For a while, neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain grew heavier, beating down like a warning drum. Jack looked at Zorax again, this powerful alien warrior who had once led troops into battle, who had burned villages and crushed defenses without hesitation. And now he lay broken, not as a monster, but as someone. Almost familiar, but not everyone would see that. Suddenly, a voice crackled through Jack's radio, faint but clear. Unit 9 Delta, respond. You are overdue. Report status immediately. Jack froze. He hadn't expected the signal to reach this far. He thought the radio was dead. For a second, he didn't move. His finger hovered over the button. One press, and everything would change. Zorax watched him closely. They're calling for you, he said. I know. You should go. Jack looked down, fingers shaking. If I answer, I'll have to lie. If I don't, they'll come for me. Either way, they'll find us. Zorax didn't respond. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. Jack turned the radio off. Silence again. Except now it wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. He stood up, pacing the small room. They won't understand. They won't even try to understand. To them, you're the enemy, and I'm a soldier who helped the enemy escape. Zorax struggled to sit up, gritting his teeth. Your people are not ready for peace. Jack turned, surprised. Peace. Zorax nodded weakly. I've seen enough of war. It's not about who wins anymore. It's about who survives. And sometimes mercy is the only thing left. Jack stared at him, stunned by the shift in the alien's voice. Not rage, not orders, just quiet exhaustion. He took a deep breath. If I wanted to, I could leave right now. Let them find you. Let this all go away. But you won't, Zorax replied. Jack smiled faintly. No, I won't. Just then, outside, something moved. A branch cracked boots on wet grass. Jack grabbed his weapon, his eyes sharp, heart pounding. He moved to the door slowly, listening. Voices, human voices. His unit had arrived. He turned to Zorax. You have to stay quiet. Don't move. Don't breathe, if you can help it. Zorax nodded, his eyes filled with trust, but also fear, the kind of fear Jack had only ever seen in the eyes of wounded comrades. Jack stepped outside into the rain, his weapon lowered but ready. The voices were growing closer, just beyond the trees. One soldier called out, Jack, is that you? Jack shouted back, I'm here. I got separated. Footsteps raced toward him. 3 soldiers burst through the trees, faces lit with surprise and suspicion. Where the hell have you been? One barked. Jack kept calm, got caught behind the ridge, took cover when the fighting got too close. My radio was out. The soldier frowned. You alone? Jack nodded slowly. Yeah, just me. For now it worked. But Jack knew it wouldn't last. They'd ask questions. They'd sweep the area, and if they found Zorax, Jack's life and the aliens would be over. The price of compassion was growing higher by the hour. But Jack had already paid the first part of it, and he was willing to pay the rest, no matter the cost. The cold, relentless rain continued to fall, and the tension in the air felt as thick as the mist that clung to the forest around them. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched low, keeping his breath steady, his senses heightened. Every crack of a twig, every whisper of the wind, sent a wave of panic rushing through him. The soldiers who had found him were still nearby, unaware of the secret he was keeping just a few yards away. They were getting closer. The moment he stepped back into the open, everything would change. They would know. It would take Zorax. The alien would be captured, and Jack would be labeled a traitor, a deserter. For a moment, Jack wondered if he had made a terrible mistake, if he should have just walked away, left Zorax behind, and saved himself. But then he remembered the alien's eyes, those silent pleas for mercy, and he knew, deep down, there was no going back. Jack. Zorax's voice, weak but clear, broke through his thoughts. Jack turned swiftly to find the alien struggling to sit up, his face pale but his expression firm. We cannot stay here. Jack didn't need to ask why. The moment the soldiers had found him, the chase had already begun. They were searching the area, combing through the thick underbrush, looking for any signs of the enemy, any sign of Zorax. and Jack knew they would find him unless they left now. "Stay down," Jack ordered softly, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods. "We have to move fast." Zorax nodded, his hand shaking as he grabbed Jack's arm for support. The alien's body still trembled from the effects of his injury, and the paralysis that had once paralyzed him was now a constant, numbing reminder of how fragile his situation was. Jack was going to have to move quickly, faster than he had ever moved before, and the thought of carrying Zorax any further only made his heart sink. The alien was too weak, too slow, and Jack could already feel the weight of their pursuers closing in. "We'll make it," Jack muttered to himself, more than to Zorax, his voice steady, despite the chaos swirling around them. But in that moment, Jack wasn't so sure. There was no clear path out. The world around them was an obstacle, a battlefield littered with dangers both known and unknown, and then a thought hit him: what if they couldn't make it? The weight of the situation was suffocating. His eyes darted to the shack door, then back to the trees. There was no time for hesitation. "We need to move now," Jack urged, carefully lifting Zorax in his arms again, his hands shaking from the sheer effort. The alien was heavier than he looked, his body unresponsive, limp in Jack's hold. There was no one else who would carry him to safety. As Jack pushed through the underbrush, keeping low to avoid detection, his mind raced. The soldiers were getting closer. He could hear their voices faintly over the wind, their calls growing louder, more urgent. "Jack, come on out. We know you're there." Jack clenched his teeth, trying to ignore the mounting fear that threatened to take over. He couldn't afford to panic. Not now. Not when Zorax's life depended on him. They couldn't hide forever. The escape route was too risky, too uncertain, and the soldiers knew the forest like the back of their hands. Jack needed to think fast. He needed a way to misdirect them, to buy time. A plan started to form in Jack's mind. He had seen the terrain on a map back at Baysan Old Access Road that could take them deeper into the woods. It wasn't the safest route, but it was the fastest. And if they were lucky, they might be able to get ahead of the soldiers and lose them in the fog. "Just hold on," Jack whispered, urgency in his voice as he adjusted his grip on Zorax, starting to move again, faster this time. Zorax's face was pale, his eyes barely open, but the alien warrior was still alive, still breathing. That was enough. As they neared the access road, Jack's heart raced. But just as they approached the opening, a sound stopped him dead in. His tracks, a loud rustling behind them. Jack froze, Zorax's body stiffening in his arms. The soldiers were getting closer. "Jack, we know you're there. Drop your weapon and surrender." The shout sent a chill down Jack's spine. He could feel the presence of the soldiers closing in, their footsteps heavy against the wet ground. They were only moments away. If Jack didn't act fast, they would be trapped. Without thinking, Jack pulled Zorax to the ground behind a cluster of bushes. The alien warrior groaned in pain as Jack lowered him gently, hoping to keep the sound of their movement as quiet as possible. The soldiers would be just on the other side of the clearing. There was no way out unless Jack could find a way to distract them. A flash of movement caught Jack's eye, a thick branch lying on the ground nearby. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, tossing it toward the trees in the opposite direction. The sound of the branch snapping against the trunks of the trees echoed through the forest. The soldiers immediately shifted, their attention diverted. Was enough. Jack seized the opportunity and pushed forward, using the moment of distraction to slip further into the forest. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. "Come on," Jack urged, his voice barely a whisper. "We're almost there." Zorax didn't respond, but Jack could feel the warrior's breath against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. A reminder that, for now, they were still alive, they were still running, and the chase had just begun. Every step was a gamble. Every second counted. Jack didn't know how far they would go, how long they could hide. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let them take Zorax. Not without a fight. The forest stretched out before them, vast and endless. But Jack had no choice but to keep moving, just keep running. Because the moment they stopped, everything would change. And this time, there might be no escape. The deeper they moved into the forest, the quieter the world became. The relentless patter of rain softened into a faint whisper, and the distant sounds of the battlefield slowly faded from their ears. It felt like a different world entirely, one where survival wasn't measured in victories or defeats, but in breaths taken and moments shared. Jack, though still tense and alert, felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The forest was a temporary refuge, but it was a refuge nonetheless. Zurax, leaning heavily against Jack, had grown quieter as the journey stretched on. His wounds were far from healed, and his body seemed to be growing weaker by the hour. Had no idea how much longer the alien could keep going, but he wasn't about to stop now. They couldn't afford to rest. They couldn't afford to be caught. "Do you think they're still following us?" Zurax asked, his voice hoarse, his words slower now. Jack glanced over at him. The alien's face was drawn and the pallor of pain still clung to him. But there was a certain resilience in his eyes, something that told Jack the warrior wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not while he still had someone to fight for. "They're out there," Jack replied quietly. "They won't stop. They'll keep looking until they find us." Zorax's expression didn't change, but Jack could see a flicker of something deeper beneath his alien eyes, a sense of understanding. The warrior was fully aware of the consequences of Jack's actions. Both of them were fugitives now, and their enemies were growing closer. The two of them moved on in silence, the path growing harder to navigate as they ventured further into the dense undergrowth. Jack was exhausted, his muscles burning from carrying Zorax and pushing through the rough terrain, but the adrenaline kept him going. It always did. He had learned long ago that the body could keep going long after the mind had given up. Finally, they came across an old abandoned hut, its walls weathered by years of neglect. The roof sagged under the weight of time, and the floorboards creaked ominously beneath Jack's feet. But it was shelter. It was safety. For a while at least, Jack helped Zorax inside. And the alien collapsed onto the floor, his body trembling from exhaustion. He had hardly said a word since they had stopped running, but Jack could feel his strength ebbing away with every passing moment. The warrior was fading, and Jack wasn't sure how to stop it. "Rest," Jack said gently, sitting down beside him. "We'll keep moving once you're able. But for now, you need to conserve your strength." Zorax looked at him, his expression filled with something Jack couldn't quite place. Gratitude? Respect? It was all so confusing. The warrior who had once been his enemy now lay on the ground in front of him, vulnerable and broken, and Jack, who had always fought for his country, for his people, was now tied to this alien's fate in a way that no one else would understand. As Jack sat there, watching Zorax try to breathe deeply, his mind began to wander. The war, the battle that had once seemed so clear-cut, suddenly felt distant. The lines between good and evil were no longer black and white. Here in this quiet, forgotten hut, Jack was beginning to see that there was more to the war than he had ever known. It was never just about who won and who lost. It was about the price they all paid: the soldiers, the families, the civilians, and the warriors like Zorax who had fought for a cause they no longer believed in. He thought back to the battle, to the moment when Zorax had been left behind, abandoned by his own people. Jack's heart had told him to save him, and so he had. But what if it had been a mistake? What if saving Zorax had changed everything? "Do you ever wonder if any of this is worth it?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question wasn't just for Zorax, but for himself as well. Zorax's eyes flickered, but the alien didn't immediately respond. When he did speak, his voice was slow, measured, like he was carefully choosing his words. "War is not about victory. It is about survival. Sometimes we fight because we are told to. Sometimes we fight because we have nothing else to lose. But when the dust settles, all that remains is the weight of what we've done." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. Zorax's words, so simple yet so profound, seemed to echo in the silence of the hut. This wasn't a soldier speaking anymore. It was someone who had seen the true cost of war, someone who had lived through the endless cycle of violence and loss. Jack had never considered the war through those eyes, not until now. You're saying it's all just pointless? Asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. All the fighting, all the bloodshed. None of it means anything. Zorax slowly lifted his head, meeting Jack's gaze. If it were pointless, we would have all stopped long ago. But we do it because we believe, sometimes in a cause, sometimes in survival, sometimes in something we can't even name. Took a deep breath. I don't know if I believe in anything anymore. You will, Zorax said, his voice full of conviction. Because even if the war does not end, there is still hope. For you, for me, for all of us. Jack didn't know what to say. Zorax's words held a truth Jack had been avoiding for so long. The war wasn't just about fighting to win, it was about the choices they made along the way. The sacrifices. The moments of mercy, like the one Jack had shown when he decided to save Zorax. And in that moment, something shifted in Jack. The war no longer seemed like just a series of battles fought for power or territory. It became a struggle of choices between compassion and hatred. Between mercy and vengeance. The future of both their worlds was uncertain. There was still so much to fight for, so much left to lose. But for the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he was fighting for something worth believing in. And that, perhaps, was the greatest change of all. The world outside had grown eerily quiet. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the forest drenched in mist. The fading light of dusk seeped through the trees, casting long shadows over the abandoned hut where Jack and Zorax had taken refuge. It was a brief moment of calm before the storm, before the inevitable decision Jack knew he would have to make. Jack had tried to sleep, but the weight of everything pressing on him kept him awake. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of his comrades, his friends searching for him, angry and betrayed. He saw the flicker of judgment in their eyes, the looks of disgust and disbelief. And at the center of it all, he saw Zorax still alive, still breathing, but only for as long as Jack could keep him safe. He looked over at the alien warrior, who lay on the floor in the corner of the room, still weak but showing signs of recovery. Zorax's breathing had steadied, but the wounds on his body were far from healed. Jack wasn't sure how much longer he could protect him, how much longer they could stay hidden. The silence stretched on until Jack finally broke it. We can't keep running forever, Zorax, he said quietly, his voice low. Barely a whisper against the soundless night. Zorax didn't respond at first, his eyes closed as if lost in thought. When he finally opened them, he met Jack's gaze, with a depth of understanding that made Jack's heart tighten. No, but we have come far enough. Not far enough, Jack muttered. They're still out there, and they'll stop at nothing to find us. Zorax didn't speak, but Jack could see it in his eyes. The same truth Jack had known all along. The truth they had both been avoiding. The reality that was now impossible to deny. The soldiers would find them. They would search every inch of the forest. They would never give up. Jack had already risked everything to save Zorax, but there was no way to keep running forever. The cost of compassion was rising higher with every passing second. Jack's thoughts raced. He couldn't just leave Zorax to be captured. But what other choice did he have? If he stayed, he risked not just his own life, but Zorax's. If they ran again, they would just be running until they were cornered. They would die like hunted animals with no hope, no escape. And that thought, that chilling, inevitable truth settled. Deep into Jack's soul, there was only one choice left. One way out. And it was a decision that would cost him everything. Zorax, Jack began, his voice thick with emotion. I need you to listen to me. Zorax's eyes met his again, and this time there was no judgment, no animosity. Just a quiet understanding, the same silent agreement that had been forged between them in the heat of battle. When everything had seemed impossible. I can't. Keep running, Jack said, his throat tightening. Oh. But I can't leave you behind either. If they come here, they'll find us. And I won't let them take you. I won't. Zorax looked at him, his expression softening. You have given everything for me, more than anyone would have. I did what I had to do, Jack replied, his voice trembling with the weight of his words. And now I'm going to do what I have to do to make sure you're safe. To make sure the war doesn't destroy both our lives." There was a long pause as Jack's words hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Zorax's gaze remained fixed on him, his body still, but his eyes held an emotion Jack could not fully read. "I'm not ready to die," Jack Zorax said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm not asking you to," Jack replied, though the truth of his own words felt bitter on his tongue. "But I can't let you fall into their hands. I can't do this alone." Zorax remained silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing in thought. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice softer than before. "Then we fight. Together." Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he considered Zorax's words. To fight seemed impossible. They were outnumbered, were already running out of time. But the alien's resolve was clear, stronger than Jack had ever seen. "We won't survive," Jack whispered, the weight of his own words pressing down on him. "Not if we fight. Not if we try to stand against them." Zorax gave a slight nod, his voice steady. "Then let it be a choice. Not a death we were given, but one we took. We choose our fate." Jack stared at the alien warrior, the gravity of the moment sinking into him. What Zorax was suggesting wasn't just about survival. It was about making a stand. It was about facing the truth of their circumstances, no matter how bleak, no matter how hopeless. Jack had always been a soldier, but he had never been asked to make a choice like this, not one so final, so absolute. But in that moment he knew, Zorax was right. If they fought, if they chose to stand their ground, they might not win. But they would die with their honor intact. They would die fighting for something greater than themselves. Jack's eyes locked with Zorax's. And in that fleeting moment, everything became clear. There was no escape, no easy way out. But there was one last thing they could do. One final act of defiance, one final act of hope. Jack stood slowly, looking out into the forest, his fingers tightening around his weapon. Zorax, with all his strength, managed to rise to his feet, standing beside him. The alien warrior's face was tired, his body broken, but his eyes held a fire Jack had never seen before. This was it. The last stand. The ultimate sacrifice. They would face the soldiers together, side by side. And if they fell, they would fall fighting together. Jack turned to face Zorax, a fierce resolve settling in his chest. "Let's make this count." And as they prepared to fight, the first light of dawn broke through the trees, casting a faint glow on the path ahead. The battle wasn't over yet, but Jack and Zorax were no longer running. They were ready to face whatever came next, because in that moment, they had already chosen their fate.